Some moments don't announce themselves. They don't come with warnings or countdowns. They arrive fully formed, drop straight into the center of your life, and everything after that rearranges itself around the impact. Mine happened at a dinner table I didn't even want to sit at. I remember noticing how quiet the house felt the second I walked in. Not peaceful, controlled. The kind of quiet that suggests decisions have already been made and you've been invited only as a formality. The air was clean to the point of sterility. No background noise, no television, no radio. Just plates already set and food already cooling, as if timing didn't matter anymore. I took my seat anyway. If you've ever grown up in a family where tension is the default setting, you learn to read rooms quickly. My instincts were already telling me this wasn't about connection. It was about positioning. I watched steam curl up from a bowl of overcooked green beans. I remember that detail clearly because my mind does that when it's preparing for something unpleasant. It fixates on neutral objects so the rest of me can stay composed. Across the table sat my parents. Ronald at the head, posture stiff, hands folded like he was waiting to deliver a verdict. Sylvia beside him, spine straight, fork resting perfectly parallel to the plate. Curtis leaned back in his chair, phone face down near his elbow, wearing that familiar expression, half boredom, half satisfaction. No one asked how I was doing. No one asked about my son. That told me everything. The silence stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. Then Ronald leaned forward and planted both palms on the table. The sound was sharp, final, a punctuation mark. You and your son are nothing but parasites. That was it. No build-up, no hesitation, no crack in his voice. He said it the way people deliver lines they've practiced privately for years. Sylvia didn't react. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply nodded once, slowly, as if he had just articulated something she'd been waiting for him to say out loud. Curtis smirked, not surprised, not uncomfortable, satisfied. The kind of expression people wear when they think the trap has closed exactly as planned. If you were expecting shouting, this is where it didn't happen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push my chair back. I didn't demand an explanation. Control is a language in my family that only one person ever learned to speak fluently, and that night, I was the only one still using it. I looked at them one by one. Not with anger, not with disbelief. The way you look at objects, you're deciding whether to keep or discard. Then I asked one question. Very calm, very quiet. Is that the best you've got? The effect was immediate. Sylvia's hand froze midair, fork hovering inches above her plate. Curtis blinked like head missed a step in a conversation he thought he already understood. Ronald opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, nothing coming out. People prepare for tears. They prepare for pleading. They prepare for defensiveness. They don't prepare for neutrality. Especially not from someone they spent years training to stay small. I wasn't 18 anymore. I wasn't dependent. And I wasn't absorbing their words as injury. I was processing them as data. Exhibit A, I thought. Because when someone calls your child a parasite, the conversation changes permanently. That isn't an insult. It's a declaration. And declarations have consequences. I stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary. Silence is useful. It forces other people to sit with what they've revealed. Then I stood, smoothly, no rush, no visible tension. I placed my napkin on the table, aligning it neatly beside my plate. It communicates intention without emotion. They were watching me now, all three of them, waiting for something dramatic, waiting for collapse. What they didn't understand was that the collapse had already happened, not in me. In the structure they thought still existed. I delivered a single sentence. I won't repeat it here. Not yet. Context matters. Timing matters. And that sentence belongs to the moment when everything else finally caught up with the truth. What I will say is this. The room shut down. Not figuratively. Physically. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to hesitate, as if the house itself needed a second to recalibrate. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the way I had walked, in quiet, upright, fully intact. Driving away, I didn't feel shaken. I felt clear. People expect cruelty to land like a punch. But sometimes, it lands like confirmation. Sometimes it answers questions you didn't know you were still asking. On the drive back to my hotel, I thought about how often people confuse endurance with weakness, how they mistake silence for submission, how they assume survival means permission. They were wrong on all counts. What happened at that table wasn't a breakdown, it was a locking mechanism clicking into place, a moment where variables aligned and an equation finally solved itself. I didn't lose my family that night. I categorized them. There's a difference. And once you see it that way, everything that follows becomes very simple. If this kind of truth speaks to you, subscribe to Seraphine Stories. There's more coming and it cuts deeper. People like to say families fall apart suddenly. One fight, one betrayal, one door slammed too hard. That wasn't my experience. Ours fractured the way pressure fractures bone, slow, consistent, almost invisible until the damage is already structural. By the time anyone else noticed, the break had been there for years. I grew up as Marina Hale, the second child. Not the baby. Not the favorite, the spare part. My older brother Curtis was the investment. The one my parents spoke about in future tense. When Curtis succeeds, when Curtis builds something, Curtis has potential. Potential was treated like a tangible asset in our house, something that justified unlimited spending, unlimited patience, unlimited forgiveness. I was the footnote, the supporting detail that made the main narrative look more impressive by comparison. No one ever said it outright. They didn't have to. Families like mine specialize in implication, in tone, in who gets listened to at the dinner table and who gets interrupted, in whose mistakes are called learning experiences and whose are labeled disappointments. I learned early how to stay quiet without disappearing completely, how to observe without reacting, how to read outcomes before decisions were announced. The only person who didn't treat me like excess inventory was my grandfather. He didn't flatter me. He didn't oversell encouragement. He simply paid attention. When I spoke, he listened. When I had an opinion, he asked follow-up questions. When I brought home report cards, he didn't ask how Curtis was doing by comparison. Before he passed, he made one clean, deliberate decision. He left me $90,000. Not loosely, not vaguely. It was a notarized will, clearly allocated, specifically earmarked for my education, tuition, housing, books, a future path that didn't depend on anyone's approval. At 18, that kind of money doesn't feel like wealth, it feels like oxygen. I remember the afternoon it disappeared. Ronald and Sylvia sat me down in the living room. Same couch, same posture they used whenever something was already decided, and my presence was ceremonial. My Northwestern acceptance letter was still warm in my hands. I had unfolded it at least 10 times that day, just to make sure it was real. "We need your inheritance," Ronald said. No preamble, no explanation. "For what?" I asked. "For Curtis," Sylvia replied. "His construction company needs startup capital. This is a sure thing." A sure thing. That phrase still irritates me more than the theft itself. There is nothing sure about a 22-year-old who can't balance a checking account being handed 6 figures under the banner of family unity. I remember asking about my college plans. Asking, not arguing, still naive enough to think the question mattered. Ronald shrugged. A physical gesture that communicated everything I needed to know. "You're smart," he said. "You'll figure it out. Take out loans. Work. That's what people do." Translation: your future is flexible. His is not. They took the money. All of it. Curtis didn't thank me. He wasn't supposed to. In their minds, it wasn't my money. It was misallocated family property being redirected to its rightful owner. The company collapsed in 11 months. Bad contracts, worse planning, no oversight, no contingency. It folded exactly the way anyone with basic financial literacy would have predicted. They never mentioned repayment. Not once. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge the loss. The moment the business failed, my inheritance became a topic sealed behind an invisible door, something you don't bring up unless you want to be labeled selfish or ungrateful. That's when I understood something important. They weren't a safety net. They were the fall. I didn't leave home in a blaze of confrontation. There was no screaming match, no dramatic exit. I packed a duffel bag. I bought a prepaid phone. I made sure my documents were in order. Then I left. Leaving quietly confuses people who rely on chaos for leverage. There's nothing to argue against when someone simply removes themselves. The first few months were not inspirational. They were logistical. I worked 3 jobs. I slept when I could. I learned quickly which expenses were optional and which weren't. I learned that hunger sharpens focus, that exhaustion clarifies priorities. I stopped asking for help, not out of pride, out of efficiency. I enrolled in community college because it was cheaper and flexible. No ego attached. Ego is expensive. I didn't have room for it. At night, I tutored algebra. On weekends, I stocked shelves. Between shifts, I worked at a call center where time moved slowly enough for me to study between calls. I didn't complain. Complaining wastes breath. Breath is energy. Energy is a resource. Resources need to be conserved. I built systems because systems don't betray you. Color-coded budgets, automated payments, credit utilization tracked down to the decimal point. I froze my credit profile early. Once you've watched your own parents treat your finances as communal property, fraud takes on a broader definition. People romanticize resilience like it's a personality trait. It isn't, it's a process. Repetitive, unattractive, mostly invisible. By the time I transferred to a 4-year university, I had already learned something most people don't understand until much later. Clarity is currency. Not motivation, not passion, clarity. Knowing exactly what you can afford, what you will tolerate, what you will never allow again. That clarity followed me long after I left that house. People sometimes ask when I stopped seeing my parents and brother as a safety net. They assume there was a moment, a final argument, a decisive rupture. There wasn't. They were never a net. They were the ground rushing up beneath me while insisting they were helping me fly. Understanding that didn't make me bitter, it made me precise. And precision is how you survive long enough to build something better. The first time someone deferred to my judgment without asking what I owed in return, it caught me off guard. Not visibly. Internally. I had just started in tech, entry-level title, modest salary. No leverage on paper. But I understood systems. And more importantly, I understood people operating inside them. In my first role, I watched more than I spoke. Meetings are revealing when you treat them like observation rooms instead of stages. Who talks to fill silence? Who talks to be heard? Who talks only when there's something worth saying? I waited. When I finally did speak, it was to ask a question no one else had asked yet. Not because they couldn't, because they were busy defending territory instead of solving problems. What happens if this fails? I asked during a sprint planning session. Calm. Neutral. The room shifted. Risk wasn't something they liked to discuss out loud, but once it was introduced, it couldn't be ignored. That question earned me a follow-up meeting, then another. My manager started looping me into decisions earlier in the process, not because I demanded it, because I reduced friction. That's how influence actually works, quietly, incrementally. I moved from execution to coordination, from coordination to ownership. I learned how to translate between engineering, design, compliance, and stakeholders who didn't understand any of those things but still had opinions. I never raised my voice. I never competed for dominance. I let clarity do the work. Tech environments reward people who don't panic. I had a lifetime of practice staying composed while other people unraveled. Deadlines didn't scare me. Ambiguity didn't paralyze me. I broke things down. I assigned priorities. I documented decisions. Documentation builds trust. It creates continuity when personalities fluctuate. When projects succeeded, I didn't take credit loudly. When they failed, I took responsibility cleanly. That combination is rare. Leadership noticed. Promotions followed. Raises, too. By the time I became a product manager, the dynamic had fully shifted. I was no longer asking for permission. I was setting parameters. I approved budgets. I rejected proposals that didn't meet compliance. I pushed back when timelines were unrealistic. People listened when I spoke, not because of my tone, but because my track record made disagreement inefficient. It was the first time in my life authority didn't come with conditions. No emotional debt, no unspoken expectations, no obligation disguised as loyalty, just competence. That contrast was sharp. Growing up, authority in my family had always been arbitrary. Power was emotional, unstable. You never knew when it would be withdrawn or weaponized. Success didn't protect you, it made you visible. At work, it was different. If you performed, you advanced. If you didn't, you didn't. The rules were consistent, predictable, fair in a way my upbringing never was. That consistency changed how I saw myself. I wasn't capable despite my background. I was capable, period. Financially, things stabilized completely. I bought a modest condo in Chicago. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing flashy. Mortgages don't intimidate you when you understand amortization schedules. I maxed out retirement contributions, built a real emergency fund, kept my expenses intentionally below my income. Security isn't about how much you make, it's about how little you need. Around that time, my parents resurfaced. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge the past. They never do. People who believe they're entitled to outcomes rarely revisit their methods. The calls were subtle at first. Check-ins, comments about how well Curtis was planning his next move, casual references to financial stress framed as temporary inconvenience. I didn't engage. Silence is a boundary that doesn't invite negotiation. Success didn't make me arrogant. It made me immune. Immune to guilt. Immune to urgency that wasn't mine. Immune to emotional manipulation dressed up as concern. I had built a life that functioned without them. That fact alone changed the power dynamic permanently. Then Jaden arrived. Becoming a mother didn't soften me. It focused me. People like to talk about maternal instinct as something emotional. For me, it was structural. Risk assessment sharpened. Time management became ruthless. Priorities clarified instantly. I documented everything. Medical records, custody agreements, insurance policies, daycare receipts, tax filings. Not out of paranoia, out of precision. When you grow up in an environment where reality is rewritten depending on who's speaking, you learn early that documentation is protection. Jaden didn't need perfection. He needed stability, predictability, honesty. I gave him those things deliberately. We built a home together, 3 bedrooms, no shouting behind closed doors, no financial emergencies whispered late at night, no tension masquerading as love, just structure. By the time my parents made their first explicit request for help, I was no longer the person they underestimated. I had assets, I had liquidity, I had leverage, and I had boundaries sharp enough to hold their shape under pressure. Which is why, when the phone rang one quiet evening and Sylvia's name appeared on the screen, my reaction surprised even me. I didn't feel dread. I felt recognition, because when people like them reach out after long silence, it's never to reconnect. It's to extract. People assume motherhood changes your edges, that it rounds you out, makes you gentler, more flexible. That wasn't my experience. Becoming a mother didn't soften me. It refined me. Jaden arrived without ceremony. No dramatic labor story, no cinematic moment, just a quiet shift in gravity. Suddenly, every decision carried weight beyond me. Not emotional weight, structural weight. I didn't feel fear. I felt responsibility. And responsibility doesn't panic. It organizes. From the beginning, I approached motherhood the same way I approached everything else in my life, with clarity and documentation. Medical records were scanned and backed up. Insurance policies reviewed and updated. Emergency contacts verified. Custody paperwork filed and stored in both physical and encrypted digital formats. Not because I expected something to go wrong, because when something does, confusion is expensive. I learned that lesson early. Jaden didn't need chaos disguised as affection. He needed predictability. Children read stability the way adults read balance sheets. Not in words, in patterns. So I created patterns. Consistent bedtime. Consistent meals. Consistent mornings. No shouting. No slammed doors. No emotional whiplash that forces a child to become hypervigilant. Our home was intentional. 3 bedrooms, clean lines, neutral tones. Nothing that felt temporary. Nothing that needed constant explaining. When I signed the mortgage, I read every clause. I understood the amortization schedule. I knew exactly what would happen if rates shifted. Security isn't about hope. It's about comprehension. At work, I kept advancing. At home, I kept things simple. The two supported each other. There's something grounding about knowing your child will sleep soundly while you're in a late meeting. It allows you to focus fully on both roles instead of splitting yourself between them. Jaden was observant. Quiet in the way people are quiet when they're paying attention. He didn't ask for much. He didn't need much. Honesty, stability, structure. Those were the only currencies that mattered. I didn't speak about my family of origin, not because it was forbidden, because it wasn't relevant. Children don't need the burden of adult dysfunction. They need consistency more than context. When questions came, I answered them cleanly. Age appropriate. No emotional residue. That's another thing people misunderstand. Transparency doesn't require exposure. You can be truthful without being graphic. You can explain absence without demonizing. By the time Jaden turned 11, our life had settled into something steady. Product specs for me. 2 parallel processes unfolding in the same space. Quiet, predictable. That's when the past tried to re-enter. It was a Tuesday evening, ordinary. Jaden was working through math problems, pencil tapping lightly against the table while I skimmed a requirements document on my laptop. The house was calm in the way only routine can create. Then my phone lit up. Sylvia Hale. The name used to trigger something physical. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, an internal scan of what they might want this time. That reaction didn't come. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Jaden looked up. You gonna get that? Children notice pauses. They don't always understand them, but they feel them. I answered, because consistency matters. Marina, Sylvia said. Her voice trembled, but it was the controlled kind, the kind people use when they want sympathy without surrendering authority. It's your father. I didn't respond. Silence is useful. It encourages people to reveal their agenda without interruption. Hez sick, she continued. His heart. The doctors want to move fast. I heard papers shuffling in the background. Medical records, maybe? Or the suggestion of them. After years in corporate environments, I recognize staged urgency when I hear it. What do you need? I asked. Direct, neutral, she exhaled. Relief, thinly disguised. The house is in trouble. The bank is moving forward on foreclosure. Your father made some business decisions that didn't work out. We're behind on a $280,000 loan. There it was. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. We just need someone the bank will listen to, she said. You're stable. You're successful. You can help us. We're family. Family. A word that becomes elastic when people want something from you. I didn't agree to anything. Professionals don't commit without documentation. Instead, I asked for records. Loan statements. Payment history. Notices from the bank. Correspondence. Not because I plan to rescue anyone, because information reveals intention. She hesitated before agreeing. That hesitation was noted. After the call, I sat still for a moment. Jaden kept working, unaware that his grandfather's debt was attempting to cross our threshold. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Just old noise. He nodded and went back to his work. Children don't need details, they need steadiness. Later that night, after he went to bed, I reviewed the documents Sylvia emailed. Disorganized. Incomplete. No timeline. No effort at clarity. Familiar patterns. But the numbers were real, the foreclosure was real, and the recognition that settled in wasn't fear or guilt. It was alignment. I didn't owe them anything. But I did owe myself closure, so I booked a flight. Not to save anyone. To finish something they kept trying to reopen. When I told Jaden I'd be gone for a few days, he nodded without hesitation. You always come back, he said. That sentence mattered more than any appeal Sylvia could make. I booked the flight the same way I book meetings I don't want but need to attend. Short duration, clear objective, no emotional buffer time on either side. This wasn't a reunion, it was an audit. The plane landed on schedule. Rental car processed. Hotel checked in. I unpacked only what I needed. Travel teaches you how little you actually require when sentiment is removed from the equation. That night, Sylvia texted to confirm dinner. "Family dinner," she wrote. I agreed immediately. Not because I wanted to eat with them, because people reveal themselves fastest when they think you're there to reconcile. The house looked unchanged. Same peeling paint, same dim hallway light, same smell over boiled vegetables and old furniture. Time had moved forward everywhere else. Not here. The table was already set when I arrived. Cloth napkins, mismatched silverware, food cooling in its dishes, untouched. A presentation meant to suggest effort without warmth, familiar. Ronald sat at the head of the table, stiffer than before, older, not weaker, just diminished. Curtis slouched in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling with exaggerated disinterest. Sylvia moved between kitchen and table, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. I took my seat, neutral, observant. The first 10 minutes were filler. Weather, neighbors, vague references to how things have been. Curtis talked about a new opportunity, real estate this time. He used phrases like projected margins and pipeline development. Vocabulary learned, not understood. I didn't interrupt. Letting people talk is efficient. They tell you exactly how serious they are without realizing it. Ronald cleared his throat. That sound still functions as a signal in that house. Conversation adjusted around it automatically. "Marina," he said, hands clasped, tone managerial. "We need to talk about the house." There it was. "We're behind," he continued. "The bank isn't willing to extend again. We're facing foreclosure unless we can cover $180,000 in arrears." He didn't ask. He presented the number like a directive. Sylvia leaned forward. Her voice softened deliberately. "You're doing well. You've always been responsible. You could help us. You should help us." Curtis finally looked up from his phone. "You make what, 6 figures?" he said. "This is nothing to you. It's interesting how people with no financial discipline feel qualified to assess someone else's capacity." I set my fork down. Slowly, deliberately. "No," I said. One syllable. Clear. Final. The reaction was immediate. Sylvia blinked. "Marina, be reasonable." I am, I replied. "I'm not financing the consequences of choices I didn't make." Curtis scoffed. "You're acting like you're better than us." "No," I said calmly. "I'm acting like an adult." That's when Sylvia's tone shifted. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was sharp enough to cut without spectacle. "You and that boy of yours," she said, eyes narrowing. "You've been feeding off this family for years." The table stayed still. My body stayed still. But something internal locked into place with absolute certainty. I looked at her directly. "Don't speak about my son," I said. "Calm. Even. You don't have the standing." Ronald muttered. "Something about respect." Curtis laughed under his breath. "Noise. Irrelevant." Because in that moment, the structure revealed itself fully. This wasn't a family asking for help. This was a failing system demanding tribute, and systems like that don't get repaired. They get dismantled. I stood, pushed my chair in. Precise. Controlled. Then I delivered the sentence that changed the temperature of the room. The sentence I had already decided on long before I walked in. The sentence that didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't explain. It stated reality. I won't repeat it here. What matters is the effect. Silence. Complete. Total. Not shock. Recognition. I left without waiting for response. Presence implies negotiation. I wasn't negotiating. Back at the hotel, I reviewed the documents again. Loan history. Payment gaps. Acceleration notice. Patterns of negligence consistent with everything I already knew. There was no guilt, no anger, just clarity. And clarity makes the next step obvious. I didn't sleep poorly that night. Strategy quiets the mind. Uncertainty is what keeps you awake. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not out of revenge, out of alignment. Because when someone tries to involve your child in their manipulation, the conversation ends. And the consequences begin. People like to believe conflict stays contained, that what happens behind closed doors remains private. That's only true when everyone involved understands boundaries. Mine didn't. 2 days after that dinner, I was back in my hotel room, reviewing the foreclosure packet Sylvia had sent when my phone began vibrating repeatedly. Calls, texts, notifications stacked faster than coincidence allows. The first message I opened was from a coworker. "Marina, have you seen TikTok?" I hadn't, but I already knew. Escalation follows refusal when entitlement is involved. I opened the link. There she was. Sylvia Hale, seated carefully in her living room, camera angled to soften her features, eyes red, voice trembling, controlled, curated, and unmistakably performative. "My daughter abandoned us," she said into the lens. "We're losing our home, and she refuses to help. We raised her, we sacrificed everything, and now she just walked away." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. No moisture, no disruption in breath. Manufactured grief. The caption read, "Number ungrateful daughter, number family first, number heartbroken parents." By the time I saw it, the video had already gained traction, tens of thousands of views. Comments pouring in faster than anyone could fact-check. "She sounds selfish. Parents deserve better. How could a daughter do this? People like her shouldn't have kids." That one mattered, because she hadn't just attacked me. She had included my son. That's when the line stopped being emotional and became procedural. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't post screenshots. I didn't explain my side. I didn't engage. Explaining is a performance. I don't perform. Instead, I documented. Screen recordings, time-stamped comments, the video URL captured before deletion, metadata preserved, all of it stored in a folder labeled Potential Defamation Evidence. Hale facts first, strategy second, emotion nowhere on the list. That evening, I called Riley Monroe, my closest friend, a financial advisor who understands patterns better than people. "She did it, didn't she?" Riley asked. "Publicly," I confirmed. There was a pause on the line. "Not shock, calculation." "Then it's time," Riley said. "If they want attention, give them consequences." The next morning, I had a consultation scheduled with Ariana Cho, a real estate attorney known for precision. Not aggressive. Surgical. I sent her everything. Loan documents, foreclosure notices, payment history, screenshots, the TikTok video. Ariana reviewed the material without commentary. "That's how you know someone is competent." "They've positioned themselves poorly," she said finally. "They can't service the loan. The bank wants out. If you acquire the debt, the property becomes yours. Clean transfer, no emotional exposure." I nodded. This wasn't retaliation. It was alignment. "Prepare the paperwork," I said. The wire transfer took 8 minutes. 8 minutes to convert decades of manipulation into a single transaction. 8 minutes to shift leverage permanently. When the bank officer called to confirm receipt, his tone changed the moment he understood I wasn't attempting to save my parents. I was acquiring liability. Professionals recognize professionals. Once the assignment of loan document was finalized, Ariana drafted the next step: a tenancy agreement, 5-year term, monthly payment schedule, full repayment of the $280,000 principal, late payment equals termination of occupancy. Compliance clause. No harassment clause. Non-disparagement clause specifically written to cover public statements. It wasn't cruelty. It was structure. I reviewed every page, redlined one clause, initialed each section. Authorized service via certified mail and personal delivery. Ronald called first. I didn't answer. Sylvia texted, "How dare you? You think you own us?" I replied with one sentence. "I own the debt. The rest is your choice." Curtis called next. 5 times, then a voicemail full of half-finished threats and financial delusion. I forwarded it to Ariana. She flagged it as potential harassment evidence. By day 4, Ariana updated me. "They refuse to sign. They claim you're morally obligated." Morality is an interesting word for people who stole my inheritance and publicly attacked my child. "File the eviction," I said. No anger, just instruction. The notice to quit was procedural. Dates, balances, violations, recorded history, nothing emotional, just facts. When the papers were served, Ronald slammed the door. Curtis yelled. Sylvia cried for an audience that wasn't there. None of it changed the outcome. Power shifts don't require drama, just documentation, clarity, and the willingness to follow through. And I was willing. Collapse isn't dramatic. That's the part people get wrong. They imagine shouting, sobbing, slammed doors, police lights. They imagine chaos because chaos feels proportional to the damage. But real collapse, the kind that actually changes outcomes, is procedural. It's paperwork followed by deadlines followed by silence. Ariana handled the court filing without ceremony. I didn't attend. There was no strategic value in my presence. Courts don't reward sentiment. They reward documentation. And we had documentation. Loan origination records. Assignment of debt confirmation. Payment delinquency history. The notice to accelerate issued by the bank. Proof of service for the tenancy agreement. Refusal to sign. Public non-disparagement violations. Recorded voicemail flagged as harassment. Facts don't need embellishment. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. The judge reviewed the file, asked 2 clarifying questions, and issued the ruling. Possession granted. 30 days to vacate. No extensions. I received the order electronically that afternoon. I opened it once, confirmed the language, and saved it as a PDF in a folder labeled, Hale Property Final Proceedings Documentation Creates Distance. It turns history into record, emotion into fact. The countdown began. 2 days later, Sylvia texted, "We can't move everything in 30 days. Be reasonable." Reasonable is a word people use when they want you to bend so they don't have to break. I forwarded the message to Ariana. She drafted a formal response, citing the court order, restating the deadline, and clarifying that further contact outside counsel would be documented. Clean, polite, final. Day 6, Ronald left a voicemail. His tone had changed. Less authority, more negotiation. "We can pay something," he said. "Maybe in a few months. Curtis has a new opportunity lined up." Curtis always has a new opportunity lined up. That's how people like him stay suspended just above accountability. I didn't respond. Negotiation requires credibility. They had none. Day 12. Curtis posted a vague message on Facebook about betrayal and bloodlines and certain people forgetting where they came from. No names, plenty of implication. I took screenshots, time-stamped, archived. Harassment documentation added. Day 16, a neighbor emailed me. She had heard through the property manager that I now owned the house. She attached photos, trash accumulating near the garage, boxes half-packed and left in the driveway, Curtis yelling at movers who never returned. Disorganization isn't circumstantial in that household. It's structural. By day 21, the posturing stopped. The anger thinned out. The entitlement evaporated. The panic set in. This is the stage people rarely talk about, the quiet realization that no one is coming to rescue you this time. They packed poorly. Late nights, missed deadlines, scrambling logistics that could have been handled calmly if they'd accepted reality earlier. But acceptance has never been their strength. On move-out day, I stayed where I was. Distance matters. Ariana's paralegal conducted the walkthrough. Her report arrived in my inbox that evening. Furniture removed, walls scuffed, one cabinet door broken, minor debris in 2 rooms, property vacated, keys surrendered. That was it. No confrontation, no final speech, no cinematic ending, just a handover of keys. A week later, I flew in to inspect the property myself. Walking through that house felt different without them in it, not lighter, just neutral, like an object stripped of narrative. The kitchen, where Sylvia used to lecture me about family loyalty. The hallway where Ronald once told me investing in Curtis was my duty. My old bedroom bare drywall now, the carpet pulled up, nothing left to sentimentalize. No memories surfaced, just square footage. I hired a cleaning crew that afternoon, then a repair crew, cabinet door replaced, walls repainted. The property manager handled the rest. Within a month, the house was listed. Market rate, no discount. No emotional pricing. A young couple applied. Stable income. Clean credit reports. Verified references. The kind of tenants who treat obligations like commitments instead of suggestions. They signed the lease without negotiation. The first month's rent arrived on time, a clean transaction. I routed the income into a separate account I had already prepared. Jaden Hale College Fund. Not because he needs pressure, because he deserves options. That decision mattered more to me than anything else that happened during that process. Word traveled back eventually. It always does. Ronald had taken part-time bookkeeping work. Sylvia found a job at a thrift store across town. Curtis was, according to mutual acquaintances, working on something big. They'd moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Cheaper, cramped, far from the house they once treated like leverage. Their collapse wasn't my victory. It was the logical conclusion of a system that relied on extraction instead of responsibility. I didn't destroy them. I stopped cushioning the impact. That's an important distinction. People confuse boundaries with punishment. They aren't the same. Boundaries don't hurt anyone. They just remove access. When the dust settled, the silence felt different. Not the tense silence of my childhood, not the waiting for the next outburst kind. This silence was clean. No guilt, no obligation, no incoming demands disguised as concern. I returned to Chicago the same way I left my hometown years ago. Light, clear, unattached. Jaden was waiting at the front window when I got home, socks on, pencil still in hand from whatever he'd been working on. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," I answered. Predictability matters, especially to children. The next morning, over pancakes, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "I made you something." It was a drawing of our house. Bright colors, clean lines, no figures shouting through windows. Just structure and space. At the top, in careful handwriting, had written, "A new start." I didn't cry. I don't do that easily. But something softened around the edges. Not weakened. Expanded. Later that week, I finalized the lease documentation. Automated deposits. Accounting reconciliation. Everything balanced. Quiet power doesn't celebrate loudly. It simply continues. Closure doesn't arrive with ceremony. There's no moment where the air shifts and someone announces that the past has officially released you. Closure shows up quietly, usually after everything that once demanded your attention has stopped asking. That's how I knew it was over. Weeks passed without a single message from Sylvia, months without Ronald's name appearing on my phone. Curtis disappeared entirely, as people like him tend to do when there's nothing left to extract. Silence. Sustained. Not avoidance, not punishment. Completion. I didn't mark the moment. I didn't need to. My body recognized it before my mind did. The low-level vigilance id carried for decades dissolved. Shoulders relaxed without instruction. Thoughts stopped looping. Energy returned. That's the real cost of dysfunctional systems, how much attention they siphon long after you've physically left. At work, I noticed the difference immediately. My focus sharpened. Meetings felt shorter. Decisions came faster. When you're no longer managing emotional debris in the background, clarity accelerates everything else. A new initiative landed on my desk that quarter. High visibility, complex regulatory exposure. The kind of project that makes executives nervous and lawyers attentive. I accepted it without hesitation. Pressure doesn't bother me when it's clean. I assembled a cross-functional team, defined scope, identified risks, documented mitigation strategies. We moved deliberately, methodically, without theatrics. The launch exceeded projections. Senior leadership noticed. They always do. A promotion followed. Then equity. Then the kind of compensation structure that doesn't just reward performance, it compounds it. Money, at that point, stopped feeling like something to defend. It became a tool. Quiet. Reliable. Predictable. I diversified further. Conservative allocations. Long-term horizon. Nothing flashy. No appetite for spectacle. Spectacle is expensive. Jaden didn't notice the changes the way adults would. He noticed them the way children notice what matters. I was home on time. I listened without distraction. I followed through. Consistency is the language of safety. One evening, while we were clearing the table after dinner, he asked a question that told me more than any therapist ever could. Do people ever stop trying to take things from you? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because children deserve precision. Yes, I said finally. When they realize there's nothing left they can take, he nodded, thought about it, then went back to stacking plates. That was enough. I didn't poison him with my history. I didn't warn him against the world. I gave him a framework instead, that access is earned, not owed. That love doesn't demand payment, that stability is built, not promised. That lesson will serve him longer than any inheritance ever could. The house rental continued smoothly. Tenants renewed early. Payments arrived like clockwork. Maintenance issues were minor, predictable, boring, in the best possible way. I kept the property not as a reminder but as proof. Proof that leverage, once reclaimed, doesn't need to be wielded aggressively. It just needs to be placed where it can't be abused again. Every quarter, I reviewed the account tied to Jaden's future. Contributions increased, projections adjusted upward. Time did its quiet work. No pressure, no speeches, just preparation. I never heard an apology from my parents. That used to feel unfinished. Now it feels irrelevant. Apologies matter when you're still negotiating meaning, when you need acknowledgement to move forward. I'd already moved. Their recognition wouldn't change anything. Forgiveness wasn't necessary. Detachment was enough. People misunderstand detachment. They think it's cold. It isn't. Detachment is clarity without resentment. It's seeing something exactly as it is and choosing not to carry it any further. I don't hate them. Hate requires engagement. I don't wish them harm. Wishing requires investment. They exist somewhere outside my perimeter, living the logical outcome of their decisions. That's not cruelty. That's mathematics. Occasionally, someone who knows my history will ask if I regret how things ended. I answer honestly, no. Regret implies an alternative that would have preserved my integrity. There wasn't one. Every softer path would have required me to abandon myself or expose my child to instability. That was never an option. Strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like refusing to explain yourself one last time. The longer I live this way, the clearer something becomes. Power isn't dominance. It isn't control. It isn't winning. Power is the ability to opt out without consequences. I opted out. Of manipulation, of guilt, of inherited chaos, of systems that demanded tribute instead of accountability. And in doing so, I built something quieter, stronger, a life where nothing is owed backward, a future where nothing is being collected. One afternoon, while sorting old files to reduce storage clutter, I came across a folder I hadn't opened in years. Childhood documents, school records, old addresses. At the bottom was a scanned copy of the original inheritance paperwork, the one that started everything, the money that was taken, the justification that followed. I looked at it for a moment, then I deleted it, not dramatically, no hesitation, just confirmation and done. That document no longer had authority over anything. Later that evening, Jaden and I walked through the neighborhood, leaves turning, sidewalks cracked in familiar places. He talked about a science project, renewable energy, systems that feed back into themselves instead of draining resources. I smiled. Hez, already thinking in frameworks. When we got home, he asked if he could invite a friend over next weekend. Of course, I said. He grinned and ran upstairs. The house settled into its usual rhythm. No tension, no waiting, no noise from the past knocking at the door, just forward motion. People think closure is something you receive. It isn't. It's something you enforce. And once enforced properly, it doesn't need maintenance. Nothing left to argue, nothing left to recover, nothing left to collect, only continuation. This story stayed with you? Let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Stories told with clarity, boundaries, and real consequences live here. Subscribe to Seraphine Stories. Your support, whether it's a comment, a super thanks, or simply being here, keeps these stories coming. On your screen, you'll see 2 more life stories I carefully chose for you. Same truth, same quiet power. This is Seraphine Stories. I'll see you in the next chapter.